Okay, so our next topic is going to be talking about failure, the concept, the experience, the reality of failure in our lives. This is something that I have wrestled with for a long time. And as you can see right behind me, I have a lot of books on my shelf. A lot of those are self-development, psychology, personal development kind of books. And obviously, this concept of failure, it comes up a lot. This idea of having to persist, having to overcome obstacles, having to build your character through failure, all those things. Anyone who has read any self-development or self-improvement books has come across this concept. You don't just succeed the first time, you have to persist. It takes many, many times. But I do think that we have a tendency as individuals to trap ourselves with our concepts of failure. We don't see the reality of failure. We see our version of what failure is. And that's what I kind of want to deep dive into today. So I got some notes here I want to talk through. So I think if you think about what the real purpose of failure is, in a lot of respects, it's a guidepost or it's an instruction book in a way of what not to do. So if you think about that, the reality is that whenever we try to do something new in our lives, we try to achieve something, we don't really have the perfect system or process or model in place. We just can't. We don't know what we don't know. And unless we really invest in mentors or teachers or whatever, most of the time we're kind of going to figure it out for ourselves, whatever it is. So because we don't have that model, the only way that we can really learn is by screwing up, is by failing. And the failures actually give us clues. They give us instructions or advice, or they give us little distinctions that we need in our lives to adjust and to improve and to tweak. Now, you can think of any part of your life where this is true. If you work out in a certain way, say you join a yoga class or you start using weights or whatever, you will find that when you practice it for a couple of weeks, your body starts to give you indications of the weak areas of your system, right? So maybe it's your back or your abs or your legs or whatever. You're like, oh man, that really hurts. In a way, that is your body giving you instructions of what needs work. And it's the same in any part of our lives. If you want to be a good salesperson and you have a lot of rejections, there's something in the rejections that you are causing or that is creating the failure that if you look closely and you really analyze it, very often it will be an instruction of how to do better. So I wanted to share that idea of the real purpose, I believe, of failure is to give us instructions and to give us guidance. But to get that value out of it, we have to have that perspective, because if we fall into the trap of beating ourselves up or feeling like failure is something that we're trying to avoid or that we're scared of, we're never going to learn the instructions and the things that are important to actually progress to the next level. The next thing I wanted to talk about is this idea of why do we fear failure? Very often, I think the fear of failure is it's something that's trained into us. You might have read psychology books and they say that babies only have two fears. They have the fear of loud noises and they have the fear of falling. The fear of failure is actually conceptual. It's not something that we understand as little children, but as time goes on, especially when we're told no or don't or be careful, and then as you get older, it gets into more kind of nuanced versions of you shouldn't, or do you think that's a good idea, or whatever it is. You start to perceive that making mistakes or having failures are a bad thing. No one really directly says to you, if you fail, life is ruined, or you'll never succeed again. But we start to kind of extrapolate that from all these little instructions that we get, whether it's teachers or parents or peers or just society, media, whatever. We will start to perceive that it is dangerous or it's scary to fail. And this kind of, if you want to call it a meme or a mind virus, starts to permeate in our mind, and we perceive the world in a way where there's success and there's failure. In reality, there is no success, there is no failure, but it actually is just a continuum. There is, in some ways, you're succeeding more, some ways maybe you're failing more, but there's no definite of either. And you will know this. If you've succeeded in some way in your life, it's not permanent, it's not forever. You still have to get up the next morning and work hard and do what you're doing. And it's the same with failure. If you fail in some way, it's not permanent, it's not forever. You can still get up tomorrow and try again. but we fear the permanence of failure. We think if I do something, if I ask someone out on a date, or I try to make a sale, or I try to achieve something, I try to compete in a contest, for example, if I fail, it is now permanent. And that fear of the permanence, or what it would do to us, or how other people would perceive us, I believe that is what we start to fall into. That is what we start to hold on to, and it starts to limit our desire to grow. So that is another concept that I wanted you to just to understand, is that very often your fears of failure are learned rather than internal. They're actually things that you perceive in the environment. It's kind of like when you learn to drive. Before you learn to drive a car, you don't really have a perception of road rules or what's dangerous or what's safe or anything like that. But as you begin to learn, you start to perceive these things. You notice that you have to drive the speed limit, or you have to check your mirrors, or you have to drive within the lines on the road. And failure is very much the same thing. We start to learn from people around us that you should fear making a mistake, or you should fear stepping out of your comfort zone, or whatever it is. And we follow those examples of other people. I'm not saying that it's always bad to follow other people's advice or examples, but very often their fears and their beliefs are limiting for them, and we start to take them on for ourselves. So this fear of failure is something that I'm always aware of. If I start to fear it, or I start to feel the fear of failure, I say, where did I learn this from? Is it someone who taught me this? Is it society? Is it something that I'm falling into? And then I kind of just let it go a little bit. I say, I have the fear, it's okay, but I'm just going to ride with it, because there is no permanent failure. There's no permanent success. It's on a continuum, and we'll be okay. The next idea I have for you is that you win or you learn. And this is actually something I learned by reading a book by John Kavanagh, who's the coach of Conor McGregor, the UFC fighter. He wrote a book called Win or Learn. And this is the philosophy that he has in his gym with all of his fighters. If you think about MMA or cage fighting, the idea of winning or losing is very definite. You either defeat the opponent or you're defeated. There's no middle ground here most of the time. You're a winner or a loser. But what he actually says is that he teaches his fighters, as they're developing and growing, to think in terms of winning or learning. And this goes back to what I was saying with the first concept, is that the true purpose of failure is to give us instructions, is to give us guidance, is to give us distinctions. When you don't win, you actually have an opportunity to learn. And so this takes away the concept of failure completely, because a win is a win and you celebrate the victory however you do. But a learn is actually a victory as well, because you go up a level in your life. So this is a great thing that I have started to incorporate into everything that I do, is when I do have a failure or a frustration or a setback, I say, okay, I didn't win, but what did I learn? And inevitably, there is something there that you can take away. Another concept that I want to share here, which is kind of a fun one, is this idea of failing up. And this is actually something I learned many years ago from a friend of mine who was a bit of a Casanova, a bit of a ladies' man. He and I used to go out on the town when I was much younger, and he would always be talking to all the women. He'd be charming them, and they'd be laughing and have a good time. And one time I said to him, why are you so good at doing this? Why do you have this gift? And he said, because I'm very good at failing up. And I thought, what does that mean? And he said, I'll show you. And so he said, follow me. And we went for a walk around the bar, and he would walk up to a group of women who were all talking, and he would point at them and he would say, hey, ladies, you don't want to talk to me. And then he would walk away. And then he would go to the next group of women and he would say, hey, excuse me, ladies, you don't want to talk to me. And then he would do it again. And he would go around the bar doing this 4 or 5 times to all the different groups of ladies in there who appeared to be single. And then he would go and take a seat. And he would sit down quite content with himself. And I watched him do this in shock. I thought, what is he doing? But one by one, women from those groups came up to him and they said, what do you mean I don't want to talk to you? Maybe I do want to talk to you. And he said, oh, okay, great. Well, what's your name? And he started talking to them. When I saw him do this the first time, I thought, this is crazy. Why are you forcing yourself to fail straight away? You're actually going up and triggering a rejection. But it's a very good concept when you start to think about it. What he was actually doing was he was failing up. So if you think about it in a social situation, people go out, they want to meet people. A lot of the time they'll just sit back and they'll kind of uncomfortably stare across the room or whatever. And they think, I want to talk to that person, but I better not because I might get rejected. They might not want to talk to me, whatever. What he did was actually kind of circumvent that or take care of it quickly. He would walk straight over to the person and say to them, you don't want to talk to me. And if they didn't want to talk to him, they didn't. But if they did want to talk to him, they would push back and they'd say, well, maybe I do. And he would start a conversation with them. What he was essentially doing was confronting failure very quickly. And he was doing it kind of in a bulk way. He was going around the bar very quickly, talking to all these groups of women, and he was quickly getting the failures out of the way. And his concept of failing up is a brilliant one in a lot of ways. He always had a great time. All the people enjoyed hanging out with him. And he would enjoy his night much more rather than everyone else who was sitting there looking at someone across the room, hoping to talk to them and never actually doing it. The irony was that by failing up quickly, by confronting his failures, he actually had a lot more success versus the people who would sit back and wait. They would fail because they would never actually take action. And so this is a really clever concept that I learned from him many years ago in a very unpredictable way. But the concept of failing up is one that I've always kept with me. Now, it may not be in the dating realm that you use this. Maybe it is in business. Maybe you need to get a certain number of new clients. So you can just reach out to people who would be potential clients. And you could say to them, I don't know if you need my services right now, but this is what I do. And just see what they say. Now, every 10 that you call, maybe 9 will say, no, we don't. Thank you. And you say, no problem. But then the 1 out of 10 might say, well, actually, what do you do? Tell me a bit more about it. Or maybe we'll need that soon. If you did that 100 times over a month, I guarantee that you would probably get 2 or 3 new clients just from the fact that you reach out, you say to them, you might not want my services right now, but this is what I do. Because most people won't do that. They won't confront the failure directly. They won't fail up. Instead, they'll wait for success to come to them. And as we know, most of the time, success doesn't just arrive. We have to actually go out and chase it. And usually the chasing involves failing up. Great concept. So thank you to my friend. I hope you're still enjoying your life out there and doing what you do. I always remembered that experience, and it's been very valuable in many areas of my life. The last thing that I want to share with you is that failure is formative. And this is something that I have learned over many years, is that when you have a failure or a setback or a frustration, or you feel overwhelmed in life, inside of you, character is forming. It doesn't feel like it at the time. It actually feels like pain. It feels like discouragement. It feels like embarrassment or rejection. But that pain is actually causing a resistance, which is making you stronger. It's forming you. And if I go back to the gym analogy, this is a good way to explain it. When a bodybuilder or someone who wants to get in shape wants to improve their physique, build more muscle, what they actually do is they work a muscle until it gets to what they call failure. They keep doing it. And you may have done this in your life where you're working out and then suddenly you just can't do any more reps. That is the feeling of the muscle failing. It's actually run out of energy and it doesn't have any more strength and ability to do it. What is happening is the muscle fibers are actually tearing, which sounds pretty crazy, but that's what's happening inside of the muscle there. And what happens is when you then rest, the muscle fibers reform and they grow stronger. What's happening during that resistance is, and that failing process is that you're forming more muscle, more strength. It's the exact same thing in your life. When you want to succeed in some way but you fail, the character that you're building as a result of that is slowly forming under the surface. Every time I have had a big setback or a failure in my life, I've talked about a lot of them on YouTube, a divorce, a failed business, I've failed a lot in my speech contests, different areas of my life. Those frustrations have always led to formation of more character. And that's really crucial to remember. If you look at your own life, I bet there's things where you failed and you felt like at the time, I can't overcome this. I don't know what to do. How am I going to come back from this? But you did, and you actually came back stronger than you thought you would. That's because the failure is creating foundation. It's forming you. And so whatever it is that you're going through right now, if you are going through a failure in your life or a setback or an embarrassment or a frustration, remember that that feeling is actually forming you. It's building you stronger than you were. So those are all my ideas about failure. I have a couple of other videos on my YouTube channel where I talk about this concept as well in different ways. But those are things that I always try to keep in mind. And if I do get into a phase where I'm fearing failure or I'm feeling like a failure, I always remember those different things, that it does give me instructions. It does give me guidance if I tune into it, that the fear of failure is just something that I have learned usually from other people and that I can choose to just let go of and realize that it's not real. I remember the concept of failing up. The sooner I confront the failures, the sooner I'm likely to get the success I want. And then the last thing is that failure forms you. It actually builds the strength, it builds the development inside of you, and it makes you into a better person over the long term.